Welcome to the Hodgy podcast. I'm your host, Lauren Strati, and this is another one of our Christmas episodes. We will be talking about two amazing, favorite, loved for all time Christmas movies, Home Alone and The Santa Claus. I grew up watching these. Most of us did. We watch them every year. They are beloved classics that will never die or go away. We will always love them. And I hope that after listening to this episode that you will love them even more and appreciate them even more like I do. Because man, a whole lot went into these two movies. Holy cannoli. I had no idea. So we will get into that in just a second. I do want to talk about last week's episode for just a minute. So last week's episode, if you saw it, was about Christmas Carol, the book, and the many different versions. I did get to watch, after that episode, I watched another version that I haven't seen in a while with Patrick Stewart as Scrooge. And that one was actually really accurate as well. So if you're looking for one closer to the book, that one does a decent job of being accurate as well. I was surprised because last time I had watched it, I hadn't read the book in a while. But since I had just read the book a couple days ago, it's pretty fresh. So that one is fairly accurate. He doesn't exactly look like how you would picture Scrooge to look, but he still does a really amazing job of being Ebenezer Scrooge. So highly recommend watching A Christmas Carol with Patrick Stewart in it. So we are going to get started right away into these two movies. There's a lot to talk about. Then we'll talk about the weird Christmas traditions, a couple from family, and then two Christmas movie recommendations I have for you. So let's get into it. Home Alone started as an idea by John Hughes. If you don't know who John Hughes is, he was a director and a writer of some pretty major movies in the 80s and 90s. He directed 16 Candles, Weird Science, The Breakfast Club, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, Planes, Trains, Automobiles, Uncle Buck, Curly Sue. I remember having most of those on VHS growing up. I remember watching Weird Science all the time when I was a kid. Not appropriate for a kid, but I was home alone and nobody cared. So I watched whatever I wanted to. But he directed those movies. He wrote National Lampoon's European Vacation, Pretty in Pink, The Great Outdoors, National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, both Home Alones, and also Home Alone 3, Flubber, Dennis the Menace, Baby's Day Out as well. So he was huge during that time. Came out with some amazing movies. He unfortunately is no longer with us, but most of us that grew up watching those movies know of him and will always be grateful for those movies and for his creativity. So, in regards to Home Alone, he came up with this idea. It was August 8th, 1989. And I got a lot of this information from an article written by his son, which I loved that he created this article because you could just tell how much love went into this, and him talking to everybody about his dad and about Home Alone and just how big of a place Home Alone has in a lot of people's hearts. So I really liked that I was able to find this article. So he said that on August 8th, 1989, his father, John Hughes, jotted down in a notebook a movie idea born of traveler's anxiety that occurred to him during the bustle of departing for their first family trip to Europe. And then he set it aside. Then 2 weeks later, after coming home, he returned to that premise. And it was, what if one of the kids had accidentally been left behind? So then over the next 9 days, he completed the first draft of Home Alone, capped by an 8-hour, 44-page dash to the finale. So he was just going. Before finishing, he'd expressed concerns that he was working too slowly, but obviously everything worked out just fine. But 35 years later and 15 years after his death, filmmakers remain astounded at the worldwide reach of this little movie that captured their imagination on the page. Shot around North Shore in Illinois, far from the reaches of Hollywood studios, Home Alone defined everyone's pre-release expectations, becoming the highest grossing live action comedy ever made. To celebrate the film's anniversary and its place in the holiday movie canon, some of the key cast and crew came together to do this interview. So this was done, I think this article was done 10 years ago. So it's now, Home Alone's now been out for 35 years, which is what I said. And John Hughes has been gone for 15. So they started off with talking to the director, Chris Columbus. So I feel like everybody has seen that name, because when you think Chris Columbus, you think Christopher Columbus. And then so like that name kind of sticks when you see it on TV shows and on movies. But he was the director of Home Alone. He had actually just directed a movie in 89, and it was terrible. It was a disaster. He needed the work. So John Hughes had sent him the script for Christmas Vacation, and he loves Christmas. So he was so happy to do this Christmas comedy. It was like a total dream for him. But he met with Chevy Chase, and they just did not get along. It was not gonna, they did not mesh well. So he tried to make it work, but he just told John, he's like, there's no way I'm going to be able to do this movie. And he was really upset about it. Chris was really upset about it. John totally understood. Then 2 weeks later, John sends him a script, being Home Alone, to Chris's in-laws' house. And he said, wow, this guy is really supporting me when no one else in Hollywood was going to. And he said John was his savior. So reading that, I knew the movies that John Hughes did, but not anything about the man. And you never know with Hollywood. You never know what you're going to get. You know, you have this actress or this actor or this director that you love and admire, and then they're total a-holes or psychos, and you're just like, oh, God, it ruins the roles that you watch with them in, or the movies that they do. But this guy was just a good guy. So it was reading that, I knew I was going to love what I was going to read about him. So he ended up obviously having Chris be the director, and then the director, Chris, sent the script to an editor, and the editor thought, wow, a movie starring a kid on screen basically 3/4 of the movie is pretty bold. And children working in Hollywood, like, they have a completely different schedule. They can't work all the time like adults can. So it makes things a little bit more difficult. But the editor was intrigued, and he loved the message that this kid believes that he wished his family away, discovers his self-sufficiency, and then they come back, and it had all the emotions that went into a holiday movie. So they started working on it. And what I discovered, I had no idea, because when you see the beginning of the movie, you see the 20th Century Fox thing come up, and you hear that classic music. But originally, it was supposed to be Warner Brothers that did the movie, but they didn't want to pay they didn't want to pay for it. They basically started at $10 million as the budget, and they're like, well, what about 14? And then once it was going to be a little bit over that, they basically said that what other production company wanted to take it, could take it. So 20th Century then became the home for Home Alone. So when it was funny, I was reading this one part, like, Joe Roth, chairman of 20th Century Fox from 89 to 93, was having lunch with Hughes and Columbus' agent at the time, and he told him about Home Alone. He said it was costing $14.7 million, and Warner's would only pay 14. I said, what's the idea? He told me. I said, okay, if you can get it out of there, I'll make it. Seemed like a no-brainer. Didn't cost that much. Man, if I could get to have one day be like 14 million isn't that much. That'd be amazing, wouldn't it? 14 million, whatever. But so he said it doesn't cost that much. I didn't have a Thanksgiving movie. I liked the idea. I loved the people involved. So next thing, it was a Monday or a Tuesday, and we had to deal with Fox to move it over there. So bing, bang, boom, moved over there. Warner Brothers, huge mistake on their part, but I feel like it worked out for everybody else. So, but what was obviously critical to the movie was casting of the child. So Hughes had always had Macaulay Culkin in mind. He had directed him in Uncle Buck the previous year and was mindful of a particular sequence that clicked when Buck, played by John Candy, leaves a suburban house temporarily unattended, and Miles, played by Macaulay Culkin, assumes guard duty, staking out the front door mail slot for potential intruders. So he had already worked with him. He knew that he could do this, but he wanted to give Chris Columbus the freedom to make sure that that was the star. So he let him audition other kids. He owed it to himself as a director to see other child actors instead of just saying Macaulay Culkin is it. So John said, okay, take your time, do what you need to do. And they started the process. They searched through New York, LA, Chicago. They saw over 200 kids. And then when Macaulay Culkin read, you immediately knew he was the kid. And Chris Columbus said, I knew subconsciously that John knew that was going to happen, but it was really sweet of him to give me that sort of freedom. So another thing that says how kind of a guy John Hughes was. And he was a big director. He didn't have to be like that, but he was. So I really like that because it's a Christmas movie and it's supposed to be warm and heartfelt. And when you have people involved in the movie that are warm and filled with heart as well, it adds to it. At least I feel like it does. But even Daniel Stern, who played Marv Merchants, which I didn't even realize they had last names. I just thought they were Marv and, Harry. I didn't know that they had last names. But when he read the script, it struck a chord with him, and he hadn't gotten a chance to perform that kind of physical comedy since he was a kid, and he thought it was a home run. So he wanted to audition for Chris really bad, and he felt like he didn't do his best. So he asked Chris if he can come back, and he did like what he thought was his best. But Chris had told him later, like, you were going to get the part, but I figured I'd let you try again because you really wanted to. So I thought that was another, again, they just seem like good people doing this movie, which is when you're working with a lot of children, you want to have good people doing this film, right? So, but then Joe Pesci obviously got the part of Harry Lime. His last name's Lime. Fun little factoid there. So we've got Marv Merchants and Harry Lime, which is funny. But Robert De Niro turned down the role of Harry, and so did John Lovitz. So I couldn't imagine either one of those paired up with Daniel Stern or as Harry. Like, it just didn't seem... Joe Pesci was made for that part, and he had a bunch of other movies going on at the time, but he did so good at that part. But he said that in order to get the most authentic performance possible from Macaulay Culkin, he avoided him on set, so that way that he would be indeed afraid of him. So no one would blame the young actor for being a bit petrified, as he still bears the physical scar from an accidental altercation. So in the first Home Alone, they hung him up on a coat hook, right? And then Harry says, I'm going to bite all your fingers off one at a time. And he accidentally bit Macaulay Culkin, and it broke the skin, and he's got like a little bit of a scar. So definitely would scare me if I was like an 8 or 9-year-old kid, and this guy who I barely see at all just almost accidentally bites my finger off. It's just like, oopsie. But I thought that was really funny. So, and then most everybody that were actors on this movie came from the Chicago area. The kids, most of them came from Chicago. Some New York and Los Angeles, but they really kind of kept it in home in Chicago and the Illinois area because that's where the movie was filmed. They didn't do it on a lot in LA. They did it at North Shore in Illinois, so they had a little bit more freedom to do what they wanted to do. They weren't under the watchful eyes of Hollywood executives. They could really do what they wanted. So that, I mean, nowadays, I mean, some movies go to different locations, but you can tell with other stuff, there's green screens and stuff. Like, they built this set, obviously that classic house that we all know and love and wished that we could own. We know that house was in the movie, but they also built sets in a high school that wasn't being used, and they got permission to use that high school and they built sets in that. So everything felt more real. It was a high school that was closed all the time, so they were able to just be free to do what they wanted, which I thought was really cool. And they were able to just, everything felt real. Everything felt like you were walking with Kevin during this movie. Nothing felt fake about any of the scenes and where they were being filmed. So, but an interesting fact I found out about the guy that played Santa is that originally, so Santa was played by this guy, Ken Hudson Campbell, but Chris Farley actually auditioned to play him as well. But he had been out partying all night and like rolled up, still kind of drunk and whatever. And he was making like cat calls to the girls that were working in the office. And the audition did not go well for Chris Farley. And obviously he didn't get the role, and Ken Hudson Campbell got it. So, oopsie. I didn't realize, I always knew that Chris Farley was a partier, but didn't realize that he could have been playing Santa in that small part in Home Alone. So, but they wanted, so Home Alone wasn't set in suburbia any place. It was definitely tied to Chicago, definitely tied to the Midwest. And it was like other John Hughes movies as well, which were similar. So they were trying to find a house that could fit their idea. And so they actually had already had a house in mind from Uncle Buck. And it was on Lincoln Avenue in Winnetka, Illinois. And that's that house that we all know. And we all wondered how the heck did that family afford such a huge, massive house. But they actually talked to the owners, and they said that they would be shooting for 4 or 5 weeks in the house, and they gave the owners an apartment. But they explained that in the contract, if they needed to knock down a wall when they weren't home, that they could do it. So they recommended that the family kind of hang around just in case, so they knew what was happening. But 4 to 5 weeks turned into months, and for 5.5 months, they ended up like putting stuff up, taking stuff down, because they filmed the exterior parts of the film. Obviously, like, they filmed that house. There wasn't anything fake about that or anything. And then parts of the inside, like the foyer, and then the staircase and different parts, little parts of the couch, the house, the kitchen, and things like that, they filmed parts of. But most of the filming was done in that high school. They built the sets, but they still, even with all of those sets built at the high school, it still took 5.5 months at that house. So, and thankfully they had a master bedroom suite with 4 rooms. So they basically just moved into that. And they put a hot plate up there to cook, but they didn't really have to cook that much because everybody had access to the food truck. So their kids absolutely loved that they could just go to the food truck and get food. But so it was a red brick colonial Georgian house that was built in 1921 and sold. I don't know if it's been sold again, but it sold in 2012 for nearly $1.6 million. So many of the interior scenes were filmed on a soundstage, but the exterior parts and everything were filmed at that house. So, but and you don't realize, I mean, when you think about it, yes, but that house, when you look at it, like so much went into making it look warm and Christmassy, even without the Christmas tree that he hadn't cut down yet. But the house kind of looks like a Christmas present. The wallpaper and everything, like the reds and greens, all the practical lighting, the chandeliers were little jewels. Like they tried to make it look really Christmassy, and they tried to keep in mind that every shot was going to be from the point of view of a kid. So, and because of that, they had to use wider angles. The height of the camera was lower than you would normally have it. The ceilings were important because you had to look up a lot. And because they thought that we thought that kids see everything in an amplified way, is what they were saying. That we made the lights in the house feel a little brighter. Everything was goosed up a notch. It's kind of the reverse when you go back to the house that you were raised in, and everything seems so small. They made everything look bigger because you're going from the perspective of a child, which is probably why we feel like we're like Kevin in that movie, because they made it that way. They made sure to make you feel that way so you understood where he was coming from. So I thought, like, I had no idea. I mean, again, you don't think about that stuff. But one of the designers, he was saying that he spent a lot of time in Florence, and the warm tones of the place are reflective of Renaissance paintings. If you have beautiful golden light in a lot of places you go, that feeling made sense, especially with it being Christmas. And then when the family goes away, they go into a colder look, which is true. Like you go into the airport and wherever they are, it's dismal, it's blah. It doesn't have that same warm feeling that house had. So I mean, it's crazy how they can just do that so subtly with the colors and different things of the house and the lighting and everything. But what I also didn't realize was they shot the airport scene, like that was at O'Hare Airport. They had to do it in like 2 or 3 shots, 2 or 3 takes. They had 200 to 300 extras plus regular people. It was still open to the public, but they only had 2 or 3 takes of the entire family running down the terminal, and Chris Columbus said that whole thing was like nail biting. Then they had to deal with the snow. It was filmed in like the winter and spring, but it was like a warm spring, and it was not helpful. Like they had to create snow. They had snow, like they had on the second day of shooting, they had a blizzard, which was helpful, but then the snow melted. And they pretty much had to create snow from that point on. So they were using potato flakes, ice. They had trucks coming in trying to make snow. We were spraying ice. Then the ice would become a problem. Then they were doing everything. They had 15 guys dumping tons of ice in the yard. Then it said we may have even got water in the house when it started melting. It started seeping into the basement. So it was not... I mean, it's not filmed when weather's not going to cooperate with you all the time. So you have to make do with what you have. And it was not that winter and spring where normally there's a bunch of snow to help them out. Of course, when they're filming the movie, there isn't any, except for when they were filming when the mom gets home, when Kate, played by Catherine O'Hara, gets home, and there was a blizzard. There was the biggest snowstorm in years. And it was Valentine's Day. So it was in the winter. They had like no snow that winter until Valentine's Day. And Mother Nature really helped them out because that whole scene was made a lot easier with all that snow. So I always wonder, like when you see the scary old man hugging his granddaughter and greeting his family, and there's so much snow, and you're just like, oh my God, how are they doing all this snow? It was because it was a freaking snowstorm, a legitimate snowstorm. So I thought that was pretty funny. Because I just like, man, that is a lot of snow. But glad it's not all potatoes. So, and then I know a lot of people know this, but if you don't know this, when in that scene, when Kevin holds the picture of Buzz's girlfriend And he goes, Buzz, your girlfriend, woof. And it's just this picture of this girl. And nobody on the film wanted to have a girl actually audition for that part. They didn't think it was kind. They didn't think it was right. So the person who actually plays Buzz's girlfriend was the art director's son. He volunteered for the role and wore a wig and makeup to portray the character. So again, I love that they didn't want to hurt anybody's feelings. They didn't want to be like, have an audition for that type of girl. They just created her using a kind volunteer being the art director's son. So that I really like that. Then what a lot of people don't know, which you may know now because I feel like with the internet and everything, it's in social media, it's come out that the movie that Kevin watches that scares him, that he uses to frighten away the robbers, which was like you see it in the first one and then you see it, the sequel in the second movie, but it was called Angels with Filthy Souls, and it was a Depression era gangster flick that Kevin popped into the VCR, and he hits it, and then keep the change, you filthy animal, is the classic line from that, he scares away the pizza guy with that as well. So, but it actually was a fake movie. It wasn't real, but it was heavily inspired by a real film called Angels with Dirty Faces. So instead of Angels with Filthy Souls, it was called Angels with Dirty Faces. And it was a 1938 crime film with a cast that featured James Cagney, Humphrey Bogart, and Pat O'Brien. So it was kind of like a similar film, but they obviously changed some things. So in the version Angels with Filthy Souls, Ralph Foodie was cast as Johnny, and he just looked the part. Like they had to find people that looked like they were from the 40s, and he just looked the part. So, and even the guy who played Snakes in it said that after, like for years after he made that movie, people would come up to him and be like, "Oh, you're Snakes, you're Snakes." So it's pretty funny, but a lot of people for a lot of time didn't realize that wasn't a real movie, and they kept like looking it up trying to find it, but it is based off of a real movie. So if you want to watch something that is similar to it, you can watch the Angels with Dirty Faces. But Angels with Filthy Souls, or Angels in the second movie, Angels with Filthier Souls, not real. But Chris Columbus did say it was quite the hassle to shoot that, because you can't shoot it normally. You have to make it look old. But luckily he was really good with that stuff, and he didn't shoot it traditionally. He said that I shot it all in cuts, so it felt like a real 40s film. To this day, people are still fooled by Ralph's performance. They think that it's an old movie. Those Chicago actors like Ralph were old pros. So, I mean, you had to find the right guy, and he definitely pulled it off enough so that people are like, wait, that's not real? So, and then another older, like I had mentioned, old character in the movie, which was Robert's Blossom. He played Old Man Marley, also called the South Bend Shovel Slayer. Man, trying to say that 5 times fast. But he wasn't even supposed to be in the movie. Like he originally wasn't a part of the movie at all. He was added at the suggestion of Columbus, who thought the film could do with a stronger dose of sentimentality. So he wasn't even supposed to be in it, but I couldn't imagine the movie without him. I think that he played a really big role, especially with Kevin, and changing, helping Kevin see his mistakes, and then Kevin obviously helped him as well. So his role was created after the first script, according to Columbus, and his name was inspired by the Charles Dickens story, A Christmas Carol, because he was Old Man Marley, and Marley was Scrooge's partner. So I read that today, and I was like, oh, it all ties in, and I kind of geeked out a little bit. But the whole thing, he said that he had the most amazing look, and he was a fabulous actor. They don't usually come together. He had that face, and they just said that one person that was a part of the film said that she cries every time she watches that church scene. Then Columbus said shooting the church scene was kind of weirdly spiritual. It was one of the few times on the movie when the actor made my job easier with Macaulay because he was so gentle and worked so well with him. And Macaulay was really focused in that scene. And it was because of Roberts. He just commanded Macaulay's attention. It was a magical moment. So I really like that. First of all, I couldn't imagine him not being in the movie. So I'm really glad that Columbus came up with that and that actor was picked and everything went so smoothly with that, because I feel like that was a really good part of the movie. That's one of my favorite parts. But before I forget, because I will forget because I didn't write it down because I forgot. But one part in the movie that gets me every time, it's same like with a couple scenes in Die Hard, which we'll talk about in a couple of weeks. But when Kevin doesn't get to eat his mac and cheese, every time I watch it, every time I'm like, can he just get a bite of his mac and cheese? Because I remember what that kind of mac and cheese tasted like. And I won't eat it now, but I can still remember it. And like when you get a little bit of that burnt cheese taste from the microwave and that tastes like extra good, I'm like, please just let him enjoy his mac and cheese. But he doesn't. And I don't know if he ever gets to eat it. And I think that when they recreated the commercial recently, like in like 2022 or something, I don't know if he even gets to eat his mac and cheese then either. But that's one of those things that every time I see it, I'm like, please eat your mac and cheese. And then I noticed, which I will say that is one of those things because my kids have become little nitpicky noticers with shows and movies. They probably get it from me. Well, and they get it from their dad too, because he can be really annoying with that stuff too, especially with my Hallmark movies. But there's a scene where Harry walks in to the dining room, and that's when he gets like covered in honey or whatever and the sticky stuff, and then gets covered in the feathers. And you see Kevin's meal on the table, but it is not a plate of just steaming mac and cheese. It is an actual TV dinner with a little bit of mac and cheese and some veggies and some different stuff. And I noticed that for the first time this year when we watched it. I was like, blah. But it was one of those things that now I'll just always notice it, but I'll still want him to eat his mac and cheese. So just one of those funny little things. Like if that's all you notice in a movie and you still absolutely couldn't care less and you still love the movie, then that's okay. I mean, they're not perfect. I couldn't make a movie like Home Alone, so who am I to judge? But then we're going to go into talking about John Candy, who was, again, another person I couldn't imagine not being in this movie. Even though his part was small, like he really just, he helped Kate out. He made her calm down and they got home. But he came in and did that movie for 24 hours. That was it. They filmed for 23 hours straight, I think is what Catherine O'Hara said. And so he didn't really get paid that much. He did it as a favor to John Hughes. And Chris Columbus was a little nervous and intimidated to meet him because of how things went with Chevy Chase. So he didn't know, like, is this going to go the same way? But he worked really well with him, and they planned for a really long day. They made sure that the airport set that they were doing was close to the truck set, so they could just go back and forth. And then after Kate meets him at the airport, they go straight into the back of the truck, which made the shooting easy. But what didn't make it easy is that Catherine O'Hara was having such a good time with John Candy, and they improvised the whole thing that it was like, wait, you're supposed to be concerned about your son who you left behind. And she's like, oh yeah. So they shot all of this stuff and they couldn't really use most of it because it wasn't serious enough. You're supposed to be looking for your kid and you're just having a good time with these guys in a truck. So they had spent so much time trying to get the right stuff and improvising. So that whole thing was improvised, that there wasn't time in the film to show the goodbye between her and John Candy's character. So that's why you don't see it, because they just ran out of time. And they just had to go from van pulls up and then, the scene at the end where she comes in the door. So I thought that was really funny. And it's funny, like, reading all this stuff about these movies, how much is improvised. And you just think it's just classic scripts, it's just the line. But that whole scene in that truck was just John Candy improvising. And so I thought that was great. But then when it comes to like the stunts with the house, the class, the big scene with the robbers, them coming in and everything, it wasn't as complex as you might think to film it, because it was just like a beginning, middle, and an end. Like it wasn't like they said it wasn't complex like a car chase or a battle scene or anything like that. It was actually pretty much, you just had to make sure that Kevin was giving his little responses, like saying yes and, doing his little thing like that. So it wasn't looking like it was just the house running as a machine. You had to have Kevin come in and say his little things throughout the movie. But the stunts, I thought this was really cool. But I don't know if you'll think it's cool, but I didn't realize, with the stunts, how much goes into those. And obviously they have stuntmen doing a lot of the stuff. They don't have the actors. But in the script, the stunts were written, but they weren't fully defined. And there was a lot of room to invent and play with them. And Chris and John allowed the stunt coordinators to invent as they went along. So they had a lot of freedom as well to do what they wanted to do. So the stunts we did on Home Alone, no one had ever done before. So Chris Columbus said, getting the stunts to feel real and violent was crucial, because John and I used to talk about how violent stunts were funny, but the softer stunts weren't. It was getting those gags that were more dangerous and making absolutely sure the stuntmen weren't getting hurt. Literally 3 or 4 times while shooting Home Alone and Home Alone 2, I thought those guys were dead. I mean, yeah, some of those stunts you go, oh my God. But there was no CGI for it. It was kind of terrifying to watch. And only after they got up after the stunt and went to the monitor to watch the playback did they actually like take a deep breath and laugh at what had just happened. Otherwise, they just worried the whole time. So, but in the old days, if someone slipped on marbles or whatever was in the script, guys would just kind of fall down. But they wanted to make it look way more amped up, and they wanted to up the ante. So they made these guys literally look like they were hitting a patch of black ice with their feet over the head, flat on your back. It changed, and they said it changed the way people did what's called pratfalls in the movie business. Every comedy for the next 15 years, everybody would call for an interview and say, we want that Home Alone fall. So they kind of changed the game for stunts in Home Alone. But they would be nowhere without those stuntmen, because, man, they were, obviously, the actors were not going to do some of that stuff, and they looked pretty, some of those stunts are pretty dangerous. So, but they were like, the pratfalls were unique, but the sound, I thought this was hilarious. Because you see some sort of videos sometimes where you see what they use to create the sounds for different cartoons and whatnot and everything. But for the sounds, all the pratfalls were unique. They took a frozen roast beef and hit it against the ground to get the sound of a body hitting the ground. They also put a smoldering iron onto a chicken skin to make the flesh bubble and sizzle, like what happened to Harry. Everything was handmade. They wanted it to sound and be realistic, but also to have some humor in it. They played around with the sound effects. They made them big and bold as if they were part of a score. So things got really funny when the actors had to get on the ADR stage to dub the dialogue, because sometimes it doesn't translate, or you can't hear it, or it's not quite right. So because the stunt guys were taking falls, there weren't yells or reactions or anything. So they had to have the actors come in and do all those sounds. And so one of the favorite moments from one of the crew, they said, one of my favorite moments is when Kevin puts the tarantula on Marv's face. That was a real tarantula, by the way. It was not fake. And he couldn't actually scream when there was a tarantula on his face. He didn't want to freak it out. So he was just pantomiming. So when he's screaming in the movie like that, there's actually no sound coming out. He had to do that later. So could you imagine, like, yeah, I got to go into work to just, scream. And so he didn't want to freak it out, and he had to go in. And so he says to the sound coordinator, like, do you want me to scream like a girl? And the guy's like, yeah. And that was one of, like, his big favorite memories, was that, Daniel Stern's like, hey, you want me to scream like a girl? Yes, please. And that's what he does. He goes into the studio and does that classic scream, and it's hilarious. But it's just funny to now, like, see that movie knowing, like, not a sound comes out until later when they film it. But so this movie, I mean, it came out in 1990, and it was so good, but it wouldn't be, we all know that classic music, the start of it, that was done by John Williams. If you have Spotify or anything like that, like, you can put Home Alone in and you can get the classic that music. But he wasn't originally supposed to even do the movie. There was somebody else that was supposed to be the composer for it, but they ended up not being able to do it. So someone at Chris Columbus's agency got a finished print to John Williams, and he looked at the film and fell in love with it, and he called to say that he'd love to do the score. And so I feel like, and they felt as well, that the movie wouldn't have been the same. It went from an 8 to an 18. Somebody said that movie was going to be great, but with his music that he put in there, it ended up being so much better. So I really like that, how everything seemed to fall in place for this movie. And they were thrilled that Fox gave them they backed them up for having a Thanksgiving release date. So it opened in Chicago on the 10th of November, and then in the US, the whole US, on the 16th of November in 1990. And they were worried about Rocky 5, but the movie played all the way through the holidays and had a record number of number one weekends, 12 weeks total, and the film took in $286 million in the US box office. It was insanely successful, making a whopping $476.7 million at the box office worldwide. So that was a huge deal for back then, which is amazing because it was considering its small budget, which I think it was ended up being only $18 million, and it made that much, and it was a kid, and it was a kid's movie. So I thought that was pretty amazing. And that movie is still we all love that movie so much. So, but everybody was shocked at how big and successful it was. People around the world loved it. There were people in Italy there was one crew member that had family in Italy, and they loved it. They had people from Japan coming to their house, the people that own the Home Alone house. They had people, like a businessman from Tokyo, pulled up to the house to take pictures. And then somebody else, an ambassador of Japan, asked to take pictures of the house. And they were just blown away at how popular their house had become. And then Daniel Stern said that he went to visit troops in Iraq at a base camp, and they went to a jewelry store, and they had kids running up to him saying, like, Marv, Marv, Marv. Like, all these 16 Iraqi kids in the middle of a war zone in Baghdad still recognized me from Home Alone. And that was when he went in there in 2003. So, huge impact this movie made all over the world. Still huge impact today. And reading all of this, it's just, there's nothing bad in it. There's no, like, Macaulay Culkin wasn't a jerk of a kid. He was really great. Daniel Stern said that, it's important to not just go with, like, how the kid acts, but his aura. And he just had, like, this angelic aura to him. And it was just, like, such a good kid. and all the actors were good, and they were respectful of each other, respectful of the kids, and John Hughes obviously was amazing. Chris Columbus was amazing. Everything just came together so well, and it just makes me appreciate and love that movie so much more. So I knew that was going to be a lot. And since we're doing episodes once a week now, I feel like they can go a little longer because you have more time to catch up and to listen to them. So if you got to take breaks, I totally understand. Just come back to the episode, once. I don't know how long this one is going to be, but stick around, stay through the whole thing, or take breaks. Just ask if you can please just finish the episode, because I think you'll really enjoy them, and I work really hard on them and for you guys, because I think that I think you will love these episodes as much as I do if you stick around. So we're going to go into the Santa Claus, which celebrated its 30th anniversary this year. Absolutely mind-blowing. So 1994 is when it came out. So they said when one hears a Christmas movie involves the ending of a Santa Claus. So this is the origin story of the Santa Claus movie. You don't typically think of a Christmas movie as Santa falling off the roof and then somebody being like, "Hi, I'm Santa." So a little bit of an interesting premise with the movie, but the idea started back in 1989. That must have been like the year of great movie ideas. But it was this comedy duo that came up with this idea of having something happen to Santa. So it was the comedy duo of Leo Benvenuti and Steve Rudnick. So it was Rudnick who came into the duo's office one day with the hook that would become the Santa Claus. I said, "Leo, I had this thought last night. What if you killed Santa Claus and you had to become Santa Claus?" Is there a movie in that? Like, what? And though they had no experience filmmaking or anything at that point, they were just traveling around doing their comedy, but that was getting real old and they wanted to try something different. They came up with this idea. But it wasn't originally titled The Santa Claus. It was actually originally titled Such a Clatter. So I had no idea that was the case. But so Such a Clatter was going to be the original title. Obviously it changed. So for the better, I think. But they had found this company to try and help do the film. But they're like, "Oh yeah, sure, let us just make a couple of tweaks and whatever to the script and everything." And they got the script back and it was terrible. And they're like, "Okay, like we don't know what to do with these notes. Like these notes that they give us are awful." So, but thankfully and eventually the Outlaw production company ended up teaming up with Jeffrey Katzenberg and Disney, which to help make the movie. So they thankfully came together, which meant that the duo had more time for rewrites and more time to cement the film as the family Christmas comedy that we know and love. But they had to get an actor for the role. And originally which I had no idea, this role was written for Bill Murray. Like, I love Bill Murray. I loved him in Scrooged and obviously Ghostbusters and pretty much whatever he's been in, Caddyshack. But I could not imagine him being Scott Calvin. That would be so weird. But the role was originally written for him, but he said that in his opinion, the role didn't suit his humor. So it didn't quite fit with how he acted or anything like that. So he turned it down. And so other actors that they considered were Tom Selleck or Tom Hanks. There was Harrison Ford, Mel Gibson, Jeff Bridges, and Michael Keaton. Then it was also offered to Chevy Chase. So again, seeing any of them as Scott Calvin would have been completely strange for me. And I've loved Tim Allen forever. I grew up watching Home Improvement. So I couldn't imagine those movies without him. But So once they figured out that he was going to be the lead, and it wasn't an easy process because Disney was sometimes really strict with hiring actors for films, and because of their criminal records, and Tim Allen had a criminal record. He was sentenced to life in jail for drugs. So if you didn't know that, you can look up that story, or I can save it for another time. But he almost lost out on the role because of it. But Disney made an exception for him and let him do the movie. And he was a stand-up comedian for a while and had just started doing his show. And his show ended up being a hit. So, but since he was doing that show, it caused a delay with the production of the movie. But it worked out well. Script-wise, they were able to figure everything out and get that. So, to become the script that we now know and love. But so since he was doing that and he really wanted to, they were aware that they had a hit on their hands. Disney was aware that they had a hit on their hands with the series because Home Improvement was through ABC and Disney. They were trying to look for a vehicle that would allow Tim Allen to make the leap to the big screen at the time when TV stars didn't have an easy time doing that. So Tim was also eager to see if he could be in a movie, and he came across the Santa Claus and was struck by its special story and called Katzenberg to express the interest and came to see him, and that was the perfect debut film for Allen. People were really skeptical of how this guy was going to do. It was his first major film. He was just this TV guy, never acted before being on Home Improvement, but they were really surprised by how well he did. So, I mean, again, thank goodness he ended up as Scott Calvin. I couldn't imagine anybody else. But they said many critics were pleasantly surprised with his debut role. It's easy to see why his show is a rating smash. Like he had at the same time a top TV show, a top selling book, and the number one movie. He had three number ones all at one time, which is amazing. But there's an effortless quality to his humor, but it also has quite a quietly urgent edge to it. It's no doubt that this film launched Allen's career on the big screen. Today, Allen looks similar to his time in the films and went on to land the role of Buzz Lightyear in Toy Story films. So that obviously being in Home Improvement and doing so well with the Santa Claus movie got him to be Buzz Lightyear as well. So again, couldn't imagine any other voice being Buzz Lightyear either. But this part caught me off guard. The original premise, so if you've seen the Santa Claus, which hopefully most of you have, it obviously has Scott going out and saying, "Hey you," or "Hey," or whatever, and like then Santa going, "Oh," gets startled and falls off the roof, and then his son comes out and says, "You killed him! You killed Santa!" But there was a darker version to that scene that they ended up changing. So the first draft of the film was built on the hook of what would happen if a person killed Santa and then had to take his job. And that's dark. But it turns out that before Katzenberg and Disney became involved, that the story was even darker. So in the final film, Santa dies because he slips and falls off of Scott Calvin's roof after he startled him. But in the earlier drafts, he fell off the roof not because he was startled, but because Scott shot him with a shotgun. So Tim Allen says, "I actually winged him in the original script." And then he fell and broke his neck. So really, 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 really glad that they changed that, because that's real rough. Like Disney, la la la, and then bang, dead Santa. Ugh. It's like you're trying to throw Die Hard into a Disney movie. So I was really glad that they changed that. So, but then so after they changed that, they were able to get a director named John Pasquin. So his name kept coming up because they were trying to get Ron Howard, but that didn't work out. So John Pasquin, he didn't really want to do it. He had plenty of experience working with Allen because he directed the pilot of pilot and first season of Home Improvement. So Tim Allen really wanted him as the director, but he wanted to do something different. Thankfully, though, Pasquin's wife, Jo Beth Williams, I immediately knew the name because I've seen Poltergeist a million times. She played the mom in Poltergeist. I didn't, so that's cool little connection. But she said she was a deciding vote. After reading the script, Williams told her husband it was going to be a classic and encouraged him to sign on. So, see, sometimes wives are right and their intuition is right, and you need to listen to them. So, just saying. So, but it was actually his idea to have the elves be children. So he thought that it would be really a unique idea to have the elves look eternally youthful and were century-old beings with these faces of children. So he thought that was like a really big key decision made that Pasquin helped with. He said that here's a chance to surround this guy who has no connection with children in his life. He's a father who's separated from his kid, and here's a chance to surround him with children. And of course, but when you're working with children, just like with Home Alone, everything, and these kids were like real young. So the kids couldn't work with the same hours as the adults. And because many of them were quite young, some of them were convinced that Tim Allen was actually Santa Claus and were eager to touch him while he was in uncomfortable makeup and a fat suit. And so he had to occasionally be separated from them to give himself a break because he spent 4 hours getting ready in that suit, and it was itchy and uncomfortable. And they were doing this filming in warehouses with no air conditioning and stuff. So it was a little bit of a rough go for him, but he explained that he didn't want to disappoint the kids, so he had to stay in character pretty much all the time around the kids. He couldn't swear or get mad. The elves would just gaze at him all day long and ask him ridiculous questions about Christmas. So I thought that was kind of funny. Like, this poor guy is like sweating to death in this fat suit, super uncomfortable, but all these kids are just like, Santa, and he couldn't be like, get the F away from me. He just had to be like, yes, child. It's just really funny to think about this poor guy. But he was dedicated, and he did an amazing job as Santa. So he's one of my favorite Santas in all the Christmas movies. I love that the explanation of things for Christmas. I think it helps kids with their belief in Santa and just explaining how everything goes. And plus him as Santa, they did a really great job with that. But there was also, so everyone will remember that Paige Tamada was Judy the elf. So in the first one, they had Judy, the one who makes the amazing hot chocolate that everybody wished they had the recipe for. And they're like, come on, Judy, like, can we sell this hot chocolate? Everybody wanted to know what her hot chocolate tastes like. But she's remembered so much because she was her ability to keep up with Alan's sense of humor. And she was so beloved that fans questioned why she didn't return for Santa Claus 2. She just didn't continue acting. She stopped acting, but she was in an episode of Home Improvement in 93. I remember when I rewatched the show, I saw her. It was during like a little birthday party scene, and she's racing her little car against Tim's car. So it was a pretty funny scene because when you think about the Santa Claus thing, they kind of have the same dynamic there. But she is in the Santa Claus's the show, the series on Disney Plus. She is in, I think it's season 2, and she has a hot chocolate stand. So it's a quick little shot of her. They bring her back. They don't really like make a big deal out of it. She's just like there, but she does like make a little appearance. So I highly recommend watching the Santa Claus's series it's on Disney Plus. It's one kind of reboot continuation thing I actually really, really like. So I highly recommend that. But also in these movies, like with most Disney movies, they do like to throw in the Mickey ears. So in the first Santa Claus movie, when Scott and Charlie are leaving the North Pole in the sleigh, you you can see the moon and you can see the Mickey ears on that. And then in the Santa Claus 2, there's a hidden Mickey mini doll placed in the corner of the screen. So you gotta try and keep an eye out for those. But they like to throw stuff like Easter eggs in there like that, or parts of like little nods to Home Improvement. They had Benny, the guy who played Benny in Home Improvement. He was the truck driver when they were going down the street on the sleigh trying to figure it out, when he had just put on the coat to be Santa or whatever, and he's like driving down and he's asking like how to go. So that was, and then he said a couple of lines from Home Improvement and talking about fire hydrant or fire extinguisher safety and how you always need to have one around. And then his little grunt ho 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 is a nod to Home Improvement as well. So, but just like with filming Home Alone, the weather wasn't always kind to them while filming. They were filming in Toronto, but they're trying to film mostly winter movie in an unusually warm spring and early summer in Toronto. So they had to make the snow throughout this whole movie, which was kind of a pain. They did their very best but they were like, it's really hard to make snow. They were trying to make it as wintry as possible. But it doesn't always work. But I do think it's funny that they use like the instant potato based stuff. Like that's like, whenever I see snow now in movies, I'm going to think, is that real? Or is it potato? So now you're going to think about it. Every time you see snow in any kind of movie, you're going to think, is it real? Or is it potato? So you're welcome. But then there's also something to look for, which most of us know, I think, is you can see all the elves scattered throughout the movie in the real world. They said if you look closely, the first elf you can see at the very beginning of the movie, walking away from a window looking at toys. Then they're also spotted, you can see one at Denny's when Scott and Charlie first sit down. And then it says that you can find at least 6 elves appearing before there's even any knowledge of Santa Claus. So I don't know if I've actually seen 6, but I know I've seen at least 3 before any knowledge of Santa Claus. So, but what really cracked me up, and it made me think of my brother-in-law, because he used to play this all the time and I used to play it on our kitchen table on our big clunky computer. He always used to play this game. So the grunting sounds used for Comet the Reindeer in the 1994 movie, The Santa Claus, were simply reused sound effects from the 1993 video game, Doom. Doom. So, John, if you're watching this, it made me think of you and playing Doom, because we used to play that all the time at the kitchen table. And then, so I thought that was absolutely hilarious. Did not expect that at all. But then if you're wondering, I'm trying to go through this kind of quick because we're past the hour mark, so just bear with me. But if you're wondering what happened to Bernard, because he is in the first 2 movies and he's not in the third, and they don't really give any explanation in the third, the actor himself was filming a successful series called Numbers, and scheduling didn't quite work out, and he didn't think that his character was being valued enough, so he didn't make really much of an effort to return. So it wasn't really addressed what happened to him. But in the Santa Claus's series, I won't ruin it for you, they do explain what happened to him. They explain a lot of things. They explain what happened to that Santa that fell off the roof. They explain a lot. So highly recommend. There's 2 seasons. They might do a season again in 2025. Tim Allen's busy filming a new series now that hasn't premiered yet, but they're hoping that he'll be free to maybe do that, because it ended where they could do more with it. It didn't end on a cliffhanger, which is good if they don't do more, but it did end where there's so much more that they could do. But I highly recommend watching the Santa Clauses if you have Disney Plus or the ability to watch that show. It was really, really good. But so even though Bernard didn't come back, there were others that obviously came back. The Peter Boyle, who actually played Scott's boss in the first movie, came back, and he played Father Time in the second and third movie, and his playing the role of Father Time in the Santa Claus 3 was actually his final film role before he passed away. So that kind of tugs at my heart a little bit. I remember growing up watching him on all sorts of different things. But what I thought was hilarious is Wendy Crewson, who plays Laura. People kept thinking that she had been recast because of how different she looked in the second and third movie, because she kind of did like a glow up, right? Like you see her, I feel like they kind of made her look like the ex-wife, the annoying ex-wife that like, oh thank goodness she's not with him anymore, and just kind of fits more with Neil and his nerdiness and stuff, with her haircut and everything. And then the second movie, she's a little bit more done up, her hair's more normal-ish, and same with the third one. So, but people kept thinking that she was replaced, and they didn't understand it. They're like, that doesn't make sense. Like, why would you replace her? Like, she was great, but she was never replaced. It's the same actress. She just had a little bit of a glow up. So I thought that was hilarious. Like, she would always get like condolences for not being that. Like, oh, I'm so sorry they didn't have you back. She's like, but no, it was me the whole time. So that cracked me up. And then they also talked about how I thought it was funny that Tim Allen's Santa suit, they learned from the first movie and learned what not to do in 2 and 3. But his Santa suit was so elaborate, and it had a bunch of bells on it, that after like listening to the audio, they couldn't hear like half of what he said. So he had to go back and do ADR, because everybody's like, what's all that ringing? And he's like, oh, that's just me walking. So it's just like, oopsie. But he, so that was, they learned from that. So no bells that had any sound anyway in the second and third movie. But, and I like reading about, because again, you can hear so many different things. Like somebody complained about Tim Allen, like when she filmed the series, they didn't like his attitude, but then everybody else said that what she was saying didn't line up with how he actually is. And Elizabeth Mitchell, who played Carol Newman / Mrs. Claus, that said that she absolutely loved playing in those movies, and they were such a joy to make, and they were her fondest memories was working on the movies just when she had her son, and all the comedians on the Santa Claus 3 set would come practice their jokes on her. And she found that Tim Allen was hilarious and spoke very highly of her experience. And she comes back for the Santa Clauses as Mrs. Claus. So I thought that was nice, because you never know. You hear things about these comedians that they can kind of be jerks and stuff all the time, but it's nice that they actually had a good time on the set. So, but one part I did find interesting was that there's a deleted scene in the movie that they showed in the theater, but they didn't show when it came to like Disney Plus and stuff. And it was when Laura's dropping Charlie off at Scott's house, and she gives him the phone number for Neil's mom's house so he can call if he needs her. And Scott takes the piece of paper and quips, oh, 1-800-SPANK-ME. I know that number. And it didn't take Disney long to start receiving complaints that some kids had actually dialed the number, and it led to an actual working phone grown-up line. So Disney had to actually buy that number, and then anytime that the movie is aired on like regular TV, the phone number's changed to something else, but they had to buy the number to have it disconnected so people wouldn't be calling 1-800-SPANK-ME and have it be like this little 6-year-old going, hello, 1-800-SPANK-ME. So I thought that was pretty funny. But there was also one thing that I had no idea. Again, improvisation. The scene with Scott and the whole crew and Charlie and Bernard, where they're walking down the hall getting ready on Christmas Eve, and they're doing that little dance thing, and they're super sweet moves, you know, totally improvised. They didn't plan on it. Tim isn't like, he doesn't improvise too much, especially not with dancing, but that was one scene that he completely improvised, and they all just like went with it. They did it in one cut, and the director liked it so much that he kept it in the film. So I thought that was funny, because I always remember that part, because it's kind of cheesy, but you love it at the same time, and it makes you want to do the dance. That's pretty much the only part of the dance, is that sweet move, if you can see me on video. But I think this is, again, I like reading good things about these movies, because you can read so much crap about all this stuff and totally ruin the vibe of a movie and think, well, crap, man, like, I really liked that movie. Now I'm going to think about all this bad stuff all the time. But with these movies, you can think of all these funny things, like Comet is from Doom, and all these funny things that happened during the movie, or that they are actually likable people. So I really, and that is one of my favorite movies. Both of these movies we really love in this family, and they're a part of our family tradition. We always watch Home Alone and Home Alone 2. I don't think we've watched that. I think we maybe only watched that once this year. So we gotta get that in at least twice this year. And then the Santa Claus, for us, our Christmas tradition is we always put the Santa Claus on when we're decorating our tree in our family room, our fake tree. So we always watch those movies as we're decorating that. And then my in-laws, Mima and Pappy, always watch the Santa Claus on Christmas Eve every night when my sister-in-law comes over. So that is their holiday tradition that they like to do. So again, beloved movies, classics, hard not to love these. But now we're going to wrap that part up and get into some weird Christmas traditions, because there are some really weird ones. But this one, a lot of people know the name Krampus. So Krampus in Austria, St. Nicholas has an evil counterpart called Krampus. There's been scary movies about Krampus. I saw one back in the day when I was into scary movies. But he's the bad cop to St. Nick's good cop. And he's a demon-like creature with one task: to punish bad children before Christmas. So he typically is a fearsome creature with horns, shaggy black fur, cloven hooves, and a long pointed tongue. And he just goes with St. Nicholas, punishing naughty children during the Christmas season. So, but they actually have like parades. They have parades in Austria and in England, in different places of the world, with around 50 costumed Krampuses running along, like with drummers, fire breathers, all these different performances. And I saw some videos of it, because it just happened this weekend. They do it on the first, this year it was December 7th, which was yesterday, and then today, December 8th. So they had a festival, a Krampus festival in Whitby, North Yorkshire, England. So it spans 2 days, immersing participants and spectators in a world of folklore and creativity. So, but they actually, and I saw a video, they actually have like whips and sticks, because they punish the children by hitting naughty children with branches and sticks, and will even drag them to hell on occasion if they're bad enough. So, Merry Christmas, everybody. I was like, geez, man. So, but people that go to see these festivals and these parades actually get hit with these dang sticks and these branches. Like, somebody went last year and she said, I didn't realize they actually hit you hard enough to leave bruises. Like, she had bruises on her from being hit by a freaking Krampus guy. So that's one parade I will not be participating in or taking my children to in any sort of way. That's just, for me, it's talking about demons and all that stuff. That's just bad juju. We're gonna stick with good old Santa Claus and our sweet little elves. That's what we're going to stick with. But if you want to think about a kinder, not demony goat type thing, there is the Yule goat, which has been a Swedish Christmas symbol dating back to the ancient pagan times. And they had pagan festivals, but they now build a giant straw goat that is now referred to as the Gavli goat. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. I'm not Swedish by any means. But according to the official website, the goat is more than 42 feet high, 23 feet wide, and weighs 3.6 tons. Each year, the massive goat is constructed in the same spot. Fans can even watch a live stream from the first Sunday of Advent until after the New Year when it's taken down. So the Yule goat is also known as a Yulebakken or a Yulebuck. So it's a Yulebakken, which is fun to say, and will be stuck in my head for days. So I hope it's stuck in yours now too. Yulebakken. Yulebakken traffic. But anyway, sorry. So Yulebakken in Swedish, and then Yulebuck in Norwegian, and then there's a Julepukki in Finnish. So sorry to anybody who is of any of those descents if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, but I can only do so much with my research. But it's a traditional Scandinavian Christmas symbol dating all the way back to ancient pagan beliefs. So it was Christianized during the Christianization of Scandinavia. The Yule goat was reinterpreted as a symbol of Christmas, and in Sweden, the tradition of dressing up as a goat and performing in exchange for food and gifts emerged, also known as Juleboksmack. Mash? I don't know. But it's an interesting tradition that people have with goats in Christmas. I'm not there's either a scary goat man or a straw goat statue thing. So called a Julebakken. But just different things around the world are just not everybody just believes in straight up Santa, and that's all right, I guess. I'm not gonna terrify my children with Krampus though, or taking them to see a bunch of Krampuses hitting people with sticks. So that's not my Christmas tradition by any means. But if it's yours, let me know. If you've ever been to a Krampus parade or a Krampus festival, or about the Yule goat, let me know. Let me know if that's your thing. I'm very interested to hear that. But we are going to wrap this up. Thank you for sticking with me. I hope you guys have all hung around and appreciate learning all this information about all this stuff. I thought what I learned made me love these movies even more. Like I said, I appreciate them more. I appreciate the hard work that went into them. Even just making the freaking snow was hard, but they did their best to make these great movies that we all wish that we could be Charlie and have our dads be Santa, or sometimes wish that we were left home alone for days and had all this fun and everything like Kevin. But it's still, will forever have a place, and I know a lot of our hearts. So I hope that you enjoyed learning about them. I will leave you guys with 2 movie recommendations. They are Great American Class. What's it called? It's GAC, but it's Great American Family, and it's Great American Christmas is what they changed to for December. But it's like Hallmark, but a little bit more traditional, a little bit more faith-based. If you like those, there's not Hallmark expanded into a went kind of a little bit of a different way. I still love a lot of their movies, but if you're looking for just a traditional, safe, but still amazing and lovable, faith-based movie to watch on Great American Family. It's their Great American Christmas. You can get it through Friendly if you have Friendly, or through Prime. You can watch some of the movies through Prime, or I think also Hulu, Paramount, all that stuff. But there was a really good movie this year with Candace Cameron Bure called A Christmas Less Traveled. And that one was really, really good. She lost her father, and she finds this cassette with his voice on it. And like, I could only imagine, I would fall to bits if I found a tape of my mom, years after she passed away, like telling me all these things. So it definitely tugged at my heartstrings for sure, and made me, it was really, really good. And it's a good movie about forgiveness, and it's just about forgiveness and faith, but it's not like overly faithy, if that's a word, but still, and it's not overly cheesy either. So plus I love Candace Cameron Bure. Then there is A Cinderella Christmas Ball, and I actually got my husband to watch this whole thing with me, and he even liked it, which is saying something. And that's with Danica McKellar. She was on The Wonder Years. If you don't know who she is, she played Winnie on The Wonder Years. But also on GAC. Really good movie as well. It's not as cheesy as the title makes it sound. It's still really good. She lost her mother. I know everybody always loses somebody. But I think it's a really, really good movie. I like the way that they keep you guessing, because a lot of these can be predictable, and it was semi-predictable as always, but still kept you guessing still a little bit. And I really, really liked those two movies. So if you are able to watch those movies, like I said, the Friendly app, you can just get it for the month of December and then cancel it if you want to watch all of these. That's what we typically do. But I am going to wrap this up. Thank you. I know it's a little bit longer. Again, it's 1 day a week now, guys. We can do it. It's 1 day a week. You can listen a little bit longer. It's not 3 hours like some other podcasts. It's just, an hour and 25 minutes or whatever. So I really hope you enjoyed all of this information and all of this fun stuff about these movies. I love this stuff. I love, with all the craziness that goes on in the world and everything, we love these movies, and just learning more good things about them to make us love them more. Why not? Why not love these movies even more? Bring more happiness to us. There's absolutely no harm in it. So I really, really hope you guys enjoyed this. Next time we're going to go into the animated stuff. Rudolph, Charlie Brown, Frosty. Haven't even started my research on those guys. So, but I know everybody typically loves those as well. So I'm excited to get into that with you guys. And like always, if you have your own movie recommendations that you think that a lot of people don't know about, send those to me. Comment on my social media posts. Links are always in the bio of the episode. So make sure that you comment whatever you liked about this episode as well. And if you can, please leave a good review, so it helps get the podcast spread out, trying to grow my itty bitty podcast into being a little bit bigger. So I really love doing this and communicating with you guys. And I would like to communicate and help more people and bring more joy and love and laughter into other people's lives as well. I know that there's thousands of podcasts, millions, whatever, lots of them. And it's just little old me doing this. But I feel like a lot of you can relate to my struggles and my way of thinking and learning and wanting more happiness and joy in your lives. So spread the love, spread the joy, spread the podcast, and I will see you on the next episode. Bye, guys.